First Corinthians 13, it says, without love, we are nothing. And he goes on to say that we can speak in tongues of angels and possess all the gifts, but all that's pointless if we don't have love. And it's not even just like outright rudeness or lack of tolerance for people, but sometimes we can not be loving others by throwing our negativity that we feel onto others, causing them to spur into this negative downward spiral called gossip. But like, are we just a little bit out of alignment? The light of the church is its love. And when the church loses its love, we lose our effectiveness. So when Ephesus began, with Ephesus being a port city, the gospel really had the opportunity to spread not only through water but through land. It had all these different areas it could spread. And the church of Ephesus could not afford to lose the intimacy, the love that it had with the Lord, because then what it was sharing, what it was sending wouldn't be effective. And this goes for us as people. When we leave our home, we're going into the workplaces, we're going to restaurants, to stores, all these different places. And we get to be the very representation of God. In 1 John 4:12, it says, no one has ever seen God. But if we love each other, God lives in us, and his love is brought to full expression in us. Meaning, by the full expression of God's love is brought to light when we love others. It shows that God is in us. So Jesus praises the church of Ephesus. He shares some heartfelt disappointment. And then we see him give them a 3-step recovery. And it's in verse 5 where Jesus says, look at how far you have fallen. Turn back to me and do the works you did at first. And these 3 things that Jesus did, the first thing he did is he had them recognize. He said, remember where you are and where you were and where you're at now. Examine your life. If we're modeling this life of Jesus, we have to remember the common denominator whenever we read him encountering people. He did nothing apart from the Father, and he loved people unconditionally. Even to the point whenever the Pharisees came to him and were trying to get him to stumble, and they asked him this question, like, what's the greatest commandment? And he says, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. But then the second thing he says that is also important, love your neighbor. I feel like there's a reason those are coupled, and we just read it in 1 John that whenever we love others, it brings full expression. It brings God's full expression. And I think that's important, especially with us being our own port cities, wherever we're coming from. So the first thing he calls them to do is recognize. The second thing is repent. He says, turn back to me. He says, recalibrate, change the way you think. And I think this doesn't have to be a hardcore, drawn out, crying session. It could be simply like, oh my goodness, I'm off a little bit. I need to recalibrate. But he says repent. He calls them to recalibrate. And then the third thing is recapture. Do what you did at first. Seek him like you did before. I don't know about y'all, but I can remember that moment, those moments when I first gave my life to the Lord. That hunger I had, that passion. When I was in high school, I remember one of my friends specifically, like, he was so fired up. to the point of where he would like specifically reach for this one player on our football team. He was like, bro, you got to come to youth with us. Every single week he would get cussed out. And he just kept doing it. He just had this passion, and he was driving. And I was like, that was me at one point, where I was just super passionate and in love with God's people. But in the midst of life, I mean, we miss it sometimes. Sometimes we just get caught up in distractions. And he calls us to recognize, repent, and then recapture it. Like, remember where you were at first. Our love cannot be missing. As the church, we cannot have our love missing. People's souls are at stake. And I was a part of a church growing up where love was missing, where I was in a youth ministry where I was bullied because of where I lived and because of my weight. And if you know me deeply, personally, you know how this plays into my story. You know that there will be no student that walks in the LP that will not feel loved. But all of this happens because my heart stems from that intimacy with the Lord. Like, I can't love people any better than the Lord can. And out of our own attempt of trying to love people, eventually it'll run out. And I know just from all my years of being here at Victory, specifically in this church, I am grateful for a church that has loved me through all, and I put that in caps, all my awkward stages. From my teenage years to when that portion of life when I was finding myself and had a nose ring, there was still people in this church that loved me through all of that. To where I'm raising a family now, and it's like they are loving me still through that. And I can look around and see some families that have really impacted my journey, but I know all of that is caused from their overflow of love that they spend with the Father. And that's why I'm here today, because of the love they've poured onto me. So with all this, I want to wrap up and close with this. Church, have we lost our love? Are our actions because we're going through the motions, or is it because we are flowing out of the intimacy with the Lord? The church cannot be effective if we lose our love. Therefore, we need to realign our focus. We need to realign our hearts so that love isn't lost in the assignment that God has given us. And the only way love will not be lost is if we recenter ourselves on the one who first loved us.